I mean, we always talk to you about oil and energy, but this is like broad-based now. Just what do you make of the whole stew of what the markets are having to deal with? Mattis leaving on top of everything.
Right. No, I mean, I think what we're seeing in oil is a big concern for 2019 about a recession. Like, I think that is really weighing heavily on this market. I mean, there are supply concerns, but again, I don't think the supply picture is nearly as bad as many people say it is. I think it's a broad-based fear about, where's demand going to be for oil next year, concerns about Chinese demand in particular.
I mean, that's so interesting because we bring on analyst after analyst. We brought on the White House economics advisor, Kevin Hassett, yesterday, asked, what is the slump in oil telling you about the economy? It's supply related.
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, yes, you had the Saudis surging into the Iran sanctions decision, but the Saudis are pulling back barrels. There are reports this week that Saudi's going to do a bigger cut than even they announced a couple weeks ago. So I think OPEC is prepared to cut. Yes, there's a U.S. production story continuing to grow, but this type of sell-off, I think, has to do with demand.
Hang on, Halima, if you would. We've got some breaking news here to tell you about on the Fed. Eamon Javers with the details. Amen.
Yes, Sarah, I just ran into Kevin Hassett, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors here at the White House. Earlier, a few minutes ago, I brought you that reporting that Peter Navarro, the top trade advisor here, had given some comments in a report in which he said that the White House thought that the Fed was being too contractionary and doesn't understand why they're tightening when there's very little inflation on the horizon, and also that the White House thought that 2 rate hikes next year is too many. Well, Kevin Hassett, the chairman of the CEA, disagrees with that. I just asked him for his reaction to those Peter Navarro comments. He says, that's Peter speaking for himself. I asked him if he agreed with Peter's concerns that the Fed is being too contractionary at a time of low inflation. He said, I would not concur with Peter. I think the appropriate position for an economist in the White House is to respect the independence of the Fed and not to comment on their policies. And finally, I asked him if the White House has an official comment on the Fed rate hike this week, and he said, I just stated it. So clearly some difference of opinion here between the CEA and the top trade advisor on exactly what the White House's reaction is to those Fed rate hikes that we saw this week, guys.
Yeah, what else is new, I guess?
I was just going to say.
Halima,
That's right.
I mean, earlier you had Kudlow sort of calling out Navarro for comments he made. Now you have the the Council of Economic Advisors and Navarro. Who's speaking for what?
I mean, that you bring up the earlier question about Mattis leaving as well, potential government shutdown. I mean, I think it's kind of the sum of all fears in terms of what's coming out of Washington at this moment.
Obviously, this isn't new. I mean, this isn't new. Navarro disagreeing with certain other members of the economic team, and
no, but it just underscores
resigning.
this. Whether you want to call it infighting or, look, Mattis walking out of the door in protests.
That is a huge,
that's what it was.
That's almost unprecedented. I mean, for Mattis, if you look at his resignation letter, it's essentially saying, I fundamentally disagree with this president. And if you look at the response of congressional Republicans, like Mitch McConnell out there today, highly critical of President Trump, essentially saying we need these post-World War II alliances. I think there's tremendous uncertainty about where the U.S. is heading in terms of foreign policy.
What about the policy decision by the president to leave Syria? What are the implications for energy? What could be another vacuum there for ISIS, Turkey, Iran, whoever?
I think is the story
Russia.
No one's talking about in Syria. I mean, this is a decision that's obviously going to upset the Israelis. The Israelis are going to be very upset with the U.S. leaving. Iran's position, in Syria will be strengthened. The Russian position will be strengthened, but Iran's as well. And we've always said it's an important flashpoint to watch what happens on that Israeli border. So I do think potentially Syria becomes a bigger story in terms of the region in 2019.
I mean, so much instability and uncertainty.
And Mattis was the sort of adult in the room.
45.
I mean, that's the question. I mean, Mattis was seen as like the adult on foreign policy. So I think it's just concern about where are we headed.